I never thought a simple sketch would flip my entire world upside down. The meeting room was packed. Executives in tailored suits, laptops glowing, presentations droning on about quarterly projections and market analytics. I should have been paying attention. I should have been taking notes like everyone else. But instead my hand moved across the notepad on its own, pencil gliding in smooth, deliberate strokes. I was drawing him, Kolton Hayes, our CEO, the man who could silence a room with just a glance. Sharp jawline that looked like it had been carved from marble, storm gray eyes that pierced through every excuse and half-truth, and that cold, commanding presence that made even senior executives straighten their spines. He stood at the head of the table, presenting slides with the kind of confidence that came from owning every space he entered. I knew this was risky, dangerous, even. But every time he spoke, every time he gestured with those precise movements, my hand kept moving. The pencil captured the angle of his cheekbones, the slight furrow between his brows when he emphasized a point, the way shadows played across his features under the conference room lights. The shading was coming out perfect. Light touches that gave dimension to his face, darker lines that defined his strong features. I was so absorbed in capturing the intensity of his expression that I completely lost track of time. The voices around me faded into background noise. The presentation became a blur. All that existed was the drawing taking shape beneath my fingers. Then suddenly the room went quiet. Too quiet. I glanced up briefly and realized everyone had stopped talking. The presentation had ended. People were gathering their things, closing laptops, standing up to leave. My heart jumped. I quickly covered the sketch with my hand, trying to look casual, pretending I had been writing notes all along. But then a shadow fell across my notepad. My heart stopped completely. I looked up slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water, and there he was. Kolton Hayes stood directly beside my chair, arms crossed over his chest, one eyebrow raised in that way that made people confess things they hadn't even done yet. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but definitely held amusement and danger. He was looking directly at my sketch. The entire room seemed to freeze. I could feel every pair of eyes turning toward us. Someone coughed. A chair scraped against the floor. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all watching, waiting to see what would happen when the CEO caught an employee drawing instead of working. "Is this me?" Kolton asked, his voice low and smooth but with an edge underneath that made my stomach drop. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt like cement. My throat had closed up completely. All I could do was sit there frozen, while my face burned with humiliation. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he reached down and gently lifted the notepad from the table, holding it up to examine the drawing more closely. His sharp gray eyes studied every line, every shadow, every detail I had painstakingly rendered. It felt like he was reading my thoughts, analyzing my intentions, seeing straight through me. The silence stretched on forever. Finally he spoke. "Not bad, Jose." His lips curved slightly, somewhere between amusement and genuine curiosity. "You actually captured my good side. Though next time, if you want to draw me, at least give me a heads up. I would have posed properly." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. But I couldn't laugh. I couldn't breathe. My entire face felt like it was on fire. He was clearly enjoying my discomfort and there was nothing I could do about it. "Meeting adjourned," Kolton announced to the room without taking his eyes off the sketch. "Jose, my office. Now." The remaining executives filed out quickly, some throwing sympathetic glances my way, others smirking like they knew I was about to get fired. Marco, who sat at the desk next to mine, gave me a wide-eyed look that said, "Good luck, you're going to need it," before disappearing through the door. Within seconds the room was empty except for me and Kolton. He rolled up the sketch carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it under his arm. Then he walked out without another word, clearly expecting me to follow. I did. The walk to his office felt like a death march. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Getting fired was the obvious one. Maybe a formal warning. Maybe he would have me transferred to a different department. Maybe he would make an example of me in front of the entire company. His office was on the top floor, all glass walls and modern minimalism, expensive art on the walls, a massive mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He walked behind his desk and carefully placed my sketch on the glass surface, smoothing it out with his fingers. I stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or keep standing, unsure whether to apologize or explain or just stay silent. "Close the door," he said without looking up. I did. He studied the drawing for another long moment, then finally raised his eyes to meet mine. "You have real talent, Jose." His voice had shifted, less amused now, more serious, almost thoughtful. "This isn't just some doodle. You know what you're doing." Hearing my name in his deep, controlled voice sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. I forced myself to focus. "Thank you," I managed to say, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. "But I need to know something." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together, watching me with those penetrating gray eyes. "Why me? Out of everyone in that room, everyone in this company, why draw me?" My throat went dry. How could I possibly answer that honestly? Could I tell him that I had been noticing him for months, that something about his presence made it impossible not to watch him, that his features fascinated me in ways I didn't fully understand myself? I started, then stopped, trying to find words that wouldn't make this worse. "Your features are striking. The bone structure, the way light hits your face. It's interesting from an artist's perspective. Artists notice these things." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Kolton stood up slowly and walked around his desk. He moved with the kind of controlled grace that made every gesture deliberate. He leaned against the edge of the desk, much closer now, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "Something dark and woodsy." "Striking," he repeated as if testing the word. His eyes never left mine. Interesting choice of words. My heartbeat was so loud I was certain he could hear it. "You're not fired, Jose," he said finally, and I felt my shoulders sag with relief. "But we're going to have to establish some new ground rules. Starting tomorrow." "Ground rules?" I echoed, confused. His lips curved into that same dangerous half-smile from earlier. "You'll see. Come to my office tomorrow at 2. Don't be late." The next morning crawled by at an agonizing pace. I tried to focus on work, emails, reports, data entry, but my mind kept drifting back to yesterday's disaster. Everyone in the office had heard about it by now. I could feel their curious stares when they thought I wasn't looking. Whispered conversations would stop abruptly whenever I walked past the break room or water cooler. Marco leaned over the cubicle divider around 11. "So, what happened? Are you getting demoted? Transfer?" "Neither," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "He just talked to me about it." "That's it?" Marco looked skeptical. "Kolton Hayes caught you drawing him during a meeting and just talked?" "Pretty much." "Weird." Marco drummed his fingers on the divider. "That man doesn't do mercy. There's got to be more to it." There probably was, but I had no idea what. The mysterious ground rules Kolton had mentioned kept spinning through my head. What did that even mean? Was this some elaborate corporate punishment? A test of some kind? At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood outside his office door, palms sweating. I knocked twice. "Come in," his voice called from inside. I pushed open the door and immediately stopped in my tracks. The scene was completely unexpected. A professional artist's easel had been set up near the windows, angled to catch the natural light. Beside it sat a small table with paints, brushes, palette knives, and a jar of water. A blank canvas waited on the easel, pristine and intimidating. Kolton sat in his leather chair, coffee cup in hand, looking perfectly comfortable, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Paint me," he said casually, setting down his cup. I blinked. "Excuse me." "What?" "You heard me correctly." He stood and walked back to his chair, settling into it with practiced ease. He crossed one leg over the other, rested his arms on the armrests, and fixed me with that intense stare. "You proved you can draw me with a pencil. Now I want to see what you can do with color." My mouth opened and closed without sound. This was surreal. "Is there a problem?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't expect." "This is highly unusual, Mr. Hayes." "Kolton," he corrected. "And yes, it's unusual. But so is having an employee talented enough to capture my likeness during a boring meeting. Consider this your new assignment. Every Thursday at 2, you'll come here and paint. Think of it as professional development." Professional development. Right. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the easel. This should have been a dream scenario for any artist. Unlimited supplies, perfect lighting, a striking subject who was willing to pose. But the reality was far more complicated. This wasn't just any subject. This was my boss, the man I had been secretly watching for months. The man whose presence made my pulse race in ways it absolutely shouldn't. I picked up a brush, squeezed paint onto the palette, and forced myself to begin. The first strokes felt awkward, uncertain. I mixed colors mechanically, skin tones, shadows, highlights. But as I worked, muscle memory took over. My hand steadied. The painting started to take shape, except every time I looked up to reference his features, he was staring directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. His gray eyes tracked my movements with laser focus, watching the way I held the brush, observing how I mixed colors, reading my expressions like I was the one being painted instead of him. It was unnerving, distracting, electric. "You're tense," he observed suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "I can see it affecting your brushwork. The strokes are too rigid." "I'm fine," I lied, trying to concentrate on the canvas. Terrible liar. There was a hint of amusement in his tone. "Your shoulders are up near your ears and you're barely breathing. Relax." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one standing here trying to paint his boss while said boss analyzed every movement. I tried to ignore the commentary and focus on the work. Blend the shadows properly. Capture the intensity of his gaze. Add depth to the structure of his face. But my grip on the brush was too tight, making the strokes choppy and unnatural. Then suddenly I felt him behind me. I hadn't heard him get up. Hadn't heard him cross the room. But now he stood directly at my back, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to hear his breathing. "Your grip," he said softly near my ear. "You're strangling that brush." Before I could respond, his hand covered mine. The contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. His palm was warm and firm against the back of my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine to adjust the angle of the brush. The touch was deliberate, controlled, impossibly intimate for such a simple gesture. "Like this," he murmured, guiding my hand in a smooth, flowing stroke across the canvas. Loose. Confident. Let the brush do the work instead of forcing it. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Every nerve ending in my body was focused on the point where his skin touched mine. The painting in front of me might as well have been invisible. He guided my hand through another stroke, then another, his chest nearly touching my back. "Better," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Much better." Then he stepped away. The absence of his touch felt like a physical loss. I sucked in a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, but it was useless. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hand trembled where he had held it moments before. "Continue," he instructed, returning to his chair as if nothing had happened. "I want to see you finish at least the basic structure before we stop for today." I don't know how I managed it, but somehow I completed a rough underpainting. The proportions were decent, the composition solid, but I knew the moment I left this office, I wouldn't remember a single brush stroke. My mind was entirely occupied with the phantom sensation of his hand covering mine. When I finally set down the brush, Kolton stood and examined the canvas critically. He circled it slowly, studying from different angles, and I held my breath waiting for his verdict. "Promising start," he said finally. "Raw but promising. We'll continue this next Thursday. Same time. Don't be late." "Next Thursday?" I repeated. "This is going to be ongoing?" He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Did you think this was a one-time thing, Jose?" "No. We're going to see this through properly. Consider it standing appointment. Block off your calendar." Before I could argue or question or make sense of any of this, he dismissed me with a slight gesture toward the door. I left his office in a daze, my hands still tingling from his touch. 3 weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Every Thursday at exactly 2 o'clock I would arrive at Kolton's office with my heart racing and my palms sweating. He would already be positioned in his chair, waiting, that unreadable expression on his face. And for 2 hours I would paint while he watched. We rarely spoke during these sessions. The silence between us was thick with something I couldn't name. Tension, curiosity, attraction, danger. maybe all of it at once. He would sit perfectly still like a Renaissance sculpture while I worked, and occasionally he would offer quiet observations about my technique. But outside those Thursday sessions, life at the office became increasingly complicated. People noticed. Of course they noticed. How could they not? The CEO doesn't regularly schedule private meetings with a mid-level employee without sparking gossip. The whispers started small, curious glances in the hallway, conversations that stopped when I entered the break room, but they grew louder with each passing week. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on my regular work and pretend Thursday afternoons were just another business meeting. But the speculation was becoming impossible to avoid. It came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing budget reports at my desk when Marco rolled his chair over, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Okay, seriously, what is actually going on with you and Hayes?" "Nothing," I said automatically, not looking up from my screen. "Nothing." Marco's tone dripped with skepticism. "The man sees you behind closed doors every single week for hours at a time, and it's nothing?" "It's a project," I said, which was technically true. What kind of project requires that much one-on-one time with the CEO? Because last I checked, the rest of us can barely get 5 minutes with him even when we need approval signatures. I finally looked at Marco, trying to gauge how much he actually knew versus how much he was fishing for. His expression was more concerned than teasing, which somehow made it worse. "Look," I said carefully, "I can't really talk about it. It's confidential company business." Marco studied me for a long moment, then shook his head. "Just be careful, man. People are starting to make assumptions, and not all of them are friendly." His warning echoed in my head for the rest of the day. That night I barely slept, anxiety gnawing at my stomach. What if the rumors escalated? What if HR got involved? Kolton had his reputation to protect, his position to maintain. I was expendable, replaceable. The next afternoon, I arrived for our session feeling off balance and distracted. Kolton noticed immediately. "Something wrong?" he asked as I set up my palette. His tone was casual but his eyes were sharp. "No, everything's fine," I lied. He didn't press, but I could feel his attention on me more intensely than usual as I began to paint. My brushwork was messy today, unfocused. Colors that should have blended smoothly came out muddy. Proportions that usually came naturally felt wrong. 20 minutes in, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. "Answer it," Kolton said, "if it's that urgent." I pulled out my phone and my stomach dropped. 3 text messages from Marco, each more urgent than the last. "FYI, people in accounting are asking questions about your Thursday meetings. Someone might have mentioned it to Melissa in HR. Just giving you a heads up. Cover your bases." My face must have gone pale because Kolton stood immediately. "What happened?" I looked up at him, trying to figure out how to explain this without making it worse. "It's just office talk. People are curious about our meetings." His expression darkened. "What kind of curious?" "The speculating kind," I admitted, "wondering why I get so much private access to you when no one else does." Kolton's jaw tightened. He crossed his arms, thinking. Then he pulled out his own phone and typed something quickly. Seconds later, my phone buzzed again, but this time it was from him. "Come to the parking garage. Level B3. Now." I stared at the message, confused. He was literally standing right in front of me. He must have seen my expression because he said aloud, "Clean up here and meet me downstairs in 5 minutes. We need to talk somewhere more private." Before I could ask questions, he walked out of his office. I hastily cleaned brushes and packed up supplies, my mind racing. More private than his corner office with a door? What was happening? 5 minutes later, I pushed through the heavy garage door into the dim concrete space. The parking level was nearly empty at this hour, just a few expensive vehicles scattered across the vast space. I spotted Kolton leaning against a sleek black car, arms crossed, face serious. I approached slowly. "What's going on? Did you tell anyone about our arrangement?" His voice was sharp, controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "Anyone at all?" "No," I said firmly. "I haven't said anything. People are making assumptions on their own." "What kind of assumptions?" he pressed. I hesitated. How honest should I be? "They think something inappropriate is happening." Kolton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. And what do you think, Jose? The question caught me off guard. My heart started hammering. I think we're just doing art sessions. Just art sessions, he repeated slowly, as if testing how the words sounded. He pushed off from the car and took a step closer. Is that really all you think this is? The air between us felt charged. Dangerous. I knew I should agree, should maintain that professional boundary, should give him the safe answer. Instead, I found myself saying, I don't know what this is. Something shifted in Kolton's posture. The careful control slipped just slightly. People talk, Jose. Rumors spread. In a company like this, perception matters more than truth. If employees think there's favoritism or inappropriate behavior, it becomes a problem regardless of what's actually happening. So what do we do? I asked. Stop the sessions? I hated how much I didn't want that to be the answer. Kolton studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching mine like he was trying to read my thoughts. That would be the smart thing to do, the professional thing. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. He stepped closer again, eliminating almost all the space between us. I could smell his cologne now, that dark woodsy scent that had become familiar over the past weeks. But I don't want to stop. My breath caught. This whole situation is complicated, he continued, voice low. You work for me, there are power dynamics at play, company policies to consider. My reputation, your career, all of it could be impacted if this goes wrong. If what goes wrong? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Kolton held my gaze. Whatever this is becoming between us, the admission hung in the air between us, heavy and electric. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Finally, he stepped back, breaking the moment. Go home, Soze. Think about whether continuing these sessions is worth the risk. If you decide it isn't, I'll understand. No consequences to your position here. He turned and walked toward his car. I stood frozen in that empty parking garage, long after his taillights disappeared up the ramp, my mind spinning with everything he'd said and everything he hadn't. Thursday arrived with a weight I hadn't felt before. I stood outside Kolton's office at exactly 2 o'clock, my hand hovering over the door handle. All week I'd been thinking about his words in the parking garage, about risks and complications, about whatever was growing between us. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying that conversation on an endless loop. Part of me had considered not coming. It would be easier to send an email, make up an excuse, let the whole thing fade away naturally. But another part of me, the stronger part, needed to see this through, needed to understand what we were doing and why I couldn't seem to walk away from it. I knocked twice and entered. The painting setup was there as always, but something felt different. Kolton stood by the window, his back to me, hands in his pockets. He didn't turn around when I came in. The usual easel and supplies waited in their familiar spots, but he made no move toward his chair. Jose, he said quietly, still facing the window. His voice carried a heaviness I'd never heard before. I closed the door behind me and stayed near it, unsure. Should I set up? No. He finally turned to face me, and the expression on his face made my stomach tighten. He looked tired, conflicted, like he'd spent the entire week wrestling with something. We need to talk first. Really talk. I nodded, throat suddenly dry. He walked closer but stopped several feet away, maintaining distance like he was afraid of what might happen if he got too near. I've been thinking about everything all week, about the rumors, the complications, the professional boundaries we've already crossed. So have I admitted. You know this violates about a dozen company policies, right? His tone wasn't accusatory, just stating facts. Supervisor-employee relationships are explicitly forbidden. The power imbalance alone makes this problematic, even if nothing physical has happened yet. Yet, that word hung in the air between us. I'm aware, I said carefully, but these sessions, they're just art. Technically, you're mentoring me in a professional skill. Kolton's laugh was bitter. Is that what we're calling it? Professional mentoring? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. We both know that's not what this is. Not anymore. Maybe it started that way, but it stopped being just about painting weeks ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was right, of course. We'd crossed some invisible line without even realizing it. And now we were standing on the other side trying to figure out what that meant. Then what do you want to do? I asked, forcing myself to meet his eyes. End the sessions? Pretend this never happened? Go back to being just boss and employee? That would be the smart choice, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. The logical one. The one that protects both our careers and reputations. But he was quiet for a long moment, jaw working like he was trying to force the words out. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw in a way I'd never heard before. But every time I try to convince myself to stop this, to maintain proper distance, I see you at your desk working and I want you here. Every time you walk past my office, I have to physically stop myself from calling you inside. I've tried keeping away from you, Jose. God knows I've tried. But I can't. The confession hit me like a physical force. All the air seemed to leave the room. Kolton, I started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. Please. He took a breath, steadying himself. You need to understand what you're getting into here. I'm not an easy person. I'm demanding, controlling, possessive with people I care about. If we cross this line, if we make this real, I won't be able to share you with anyone. Won't be able to watch you smile at other people the way you smile at me during our sessions. It won't be casual or simple. So you need to decide if that's something you actually want. Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. My pulse raced. Everything in me wanted to close the distance between us. To tell him that I'd already made my choice the moment I decided to show up today. But something held me back. A need to understand fully what he was offering. What he was asking for. Why me? I asked quietly. You could have anyone. Someone who doesn't work for you. Someone without all these complications. Why risk everything for this? Kolton's gray eyes locked onto mine, with an intensity that made me shiver. Because I don't want anyone else. I want the person who sees me clearly enough to capture every detail on paper. I want the person who challenges me instead of just agreeing with everything I say. I want you, Jose. Even though it's the most irrational thing I've ever wanted. The words settled over me like a blanket, warm and suffocating at the same time. This was the moment, the point where I could either walk away and preserve the safe, predictable life I'd built, or step forward into something uncertain and potentially devastating. I took a step toward him, then another. What are you doing? He asked, voice strained. Making my choice, I said, closing the remaining distance until we were inches apart. You asked me to decide if this is what I want. It is. Even with all the complications, all the risks, I want this. I want you. Something shifted in his expression, relief, hunger, fear, all mixed together. You're sure? Once I touch you, once we cross this line completely, I won't be able to pretend it didn't happen. Won't be able to go back to professional distance. I'm sure, I whispered. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then Kolton reached out, his hand coming up to cup my jaw with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. His thumb traced along my cheekbone in a feather-light touch that sent electricity racing through my entire body. This is such a bad idea, he murmured, but he was leaning in as he said it, eliminating the last bit of space between us. Probably the worst, I agreed, tilting my face up toward his. His lips were almost touching mine when his phone erupted with a shrill ring that shattered the moment like glass. Kolton froze, eyes closing in frustration. You have got to be kidding me, he muttered. The phone kept ringing, insistent and demanding. He pulled back slightly, jaw clenched, clearly torn between ignoring it and answering. It's the board's ringtone, he said through gritted teeth. Emergency line. I have to take this. He stepped back, and the loss of his warmth felt like being doused with cold water. He grabbed his phone from the desk, his free hand still reaching toward me like he couldn't quite let go yet. Hayes, he answered, voice clipped and professional despite the fire still burning in his eyes. I watched as his expression shifted, the vulnerable man from moments ago disappearing behind the CEO mask, his brow furrowed, jaw tightening with each word he heard. When? How bad? He turned away from me and I could see tension radiating through his shoulders. No, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't start without me. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, back still to me, hands clenched into fists. I have to go, he said finally, voice hollow. Major investor crisis. Board needs me immediately. I understand, I said, even though every part of me wanted to protest. He turned back to face me, and the frustration in his expression was almost painful to witness. This isn't over, Jose. We're finishing this conversation soon. Then he grabbed his jacket and walked out, leaving me alone in his office with my heart still racing and my lips still tingling from a kiss that never quite happened. The week that followed was torture. Kolton avoided me completely. When we passed in the hallways, he looked straight ahead like I was invisible. In the Thursday morning staff meeting, he directed questions to everyone except me. And that afternoon, our usual session time came and went without a word. No text, no email, nothing. I told myself he was busy dealing with the investor crisis, that he had legitimate work reasons for the distance. But as the days stretched on, doubt crept in like poison. Had he changed his mind? Decided the risk wasn't worth it after all? Regretted what he'd said, what we'd almost done? By Friday evening, I was exhausted from the emotional whiplash. Most of the office had cleared out for the weekend, and I stayed late trying to lose myself in work. Numbers and reports were easier to deal with than the mess in my head. I was so focused on my computer screen that I didn't notice him approaching until his shadow fell across my desk. I looked up to find Kolton standing there, briefcase in hand, tie loosened, looking as tired as I felt. The office floor was empty except for us, the overhead lights casting long shadows across the abandoned cubicles. Working late, he observed, voice carefully neutral. Had some things to catch up on, I replied, matching his tone even though my heart had started racing the moment I saw him. Silence stretched between us, awkward and heavy with everything unsaid. He shifted his weight, seeming uncertain, an expression I'd never seen on him before. Come with me, he said finally. No explanation, no context, just an invitation that felt like a test. I could have asked where, or why, or demanded to know why he'd been avoiding me all week. Instead, I saved my work, shut down my computer, and stood up. Whatever this was, we needed to address it. I followed him through the empty office, into the elevator, and up. But instead of going down to the parking garage, he pressed the button for the roof access. The building's rooftop was technically off-limits to regular employees, but clearly rules didn't apply to the CEO. We emerged onto the roof and the city spread out before us in a glittering sprawl of lights. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and life happening far below. Up here, though, it was quiet, private. Kolton walked to the edge, leaning against the safety railing, staring out at the skyline. I joined him, maintaining a careful distance, waiting for him to explain. I've been avoiding you, he said finally, not looking at me. I noticed. I needed space to think, to figure out if I was making a massive mistake. He paused, then added quietly, I'm still not sure I'm not. That stung more than I expected. So you've decided to end this, whatever this is? I should. He turned to face me then, and his expression was raw, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. Every logical part of my brain is screaming that this is wrong, that I'm risking everything I've built, my reputation, my position, possibly the entire company if this goes badly. And for what? For something that might not even work. Then why are we here? I asked, forcing myself to hold his gaze. If you've already decided it's not worth the risk, why bring me up here? Why not just let it fade away? Because I can't, he said, voice breaking slightly on the words. Because I spent this entire week trying to convince myself to walk away from you, and it didn't work. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw you standing in my office, telling me you were sure, and I realized something. What? He moved closer and I could see the conflict warring in his expression. I'm terrified of what people will say when they find out, of how this could impact your career, of what happens if this doesn't work and we've destroyed everything for nothing. I've spent my entire adult life being in control, being certain of every decision I make. But with you, I don't have any certainty at all. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. You think I'm not scared? I asked softly. You're my boss, Kolton. You have all the power here. If this goes wrong, I'm the one who'll be labeled as the employee who tried to sleep his way to the top. I'm the one who'll have trouble finding another job in this industry. So yes, I understand the risks. I understand what I'm potentially giving up. Then why? he asked, searching my face. Why are you willing to take that chance? Because some things are worth the risk, I said simply. Because whatever this is between us, it feels real. More real than anything else in my life right now. And I'd rather take the chance and see where it goes than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Kolton stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact second his resolve crumbled. His hand came up to grip my wrist, the touch firm and possessive, sending heat racing up my arm. If we do this, he said, voice low and intense, we do it carefully, discreetly. No one at the office can know. We keep everything professional during work hours. No exception. I can do that, I agreed. And you need to understand something else. His grip tightened slightly. I told you before, I'm not easy. I'm possessive. Jealous. If you're mine completely. I won't share your attention. Won't tolerate other people trying to get close to you. That's who I am. Can you handle that? My pulse raced at the intensity in his voice, at the promise implicit in his words. Maybe that's exactly what I want. His eyes darkened. For a moment we just stood there, the tension between us so thick I could barely breathe. Then he closed the remaining distance, his free hand coming up to cradle the back of my head. Last chance to walk away, he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered back. And finally, he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and hungry, weeks of tension and restraint breaking like a dam. His hand tightened in my hair, pulling me closer, and I gripped his jacket like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The world narrowed down to just this, his mouth on mine, his body pressed against me, the desperate way we clung to each other like we'd been drowning and just found air. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything, he murmured. Good, I replied, still trying to catch my breath. He pulled back enough to look at me, and something in his expression shifted, softer now, almost vulnerable. No going back from this. You understand that? I wouldn't want to go back even if I could. A small smile tugged at his lips, genuine and unguarded. Neither would I. We stood there on that rooftop for a long time, the city lights twinkling around us, holding on to each other like we were the only two people in the world. And for that moment, maybe we were. The next 3 weeks were the most exhilarating and terrifying of my life. At the office, nothing changed. Kolton remained the distant professional CEO. All business, no personal interaction beyond what was absolutely necessary. We maintained perfect professional boundaries in front of everyone. No lingering looks, no private conversations, no hint of anything beyond a standard employee-employer relationship. But after hours, that was ours. Late evenings when the building emptied, we'd find stolen moments in his office. Weekends at his penthouse apartment, where he was a completely different person. Relaxed, playful, affectionate in ways that would shock anyone who only knew his corporate persona. He'd cook for me, something he apparently did to decompress. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. I learned things about him that didn't fit the cold CEO image. That he'd wanted to be an architect before business school. That he had a younger sister he was fiercely protective of. That he'd built his company from scratch after his father told him he'd never amount to anything. That beneath all that control and power was someone who just wanted to be seen for who he actually was. And I showed him my sketches, not just the ones of him, but years of work I'd never shown anyone. Landscapes and portraits, abstract pieces and technical studies. He examined each one with genuine interest, asking questions, offering observations that showed he was really looking, really seeing. You capture emotion better than anyone I've ever seen, he said one evening, fingers tracing one of my older pieces, a sketch of my mother from before she'd gotten sick. Every line has feeling in it. That's rare. I watched him study my work and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation. This was something deeper, something that scared me with its intensity. But reality has a way of crashing through even the most carefully constructed walls. Monday morning, I arrived at work to find an email from HR waiting in my inbox. Subject line: mandatory meeting regarding workplace conduct. My blood turned to ice. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 10. No details. No explanation. Just that ominous summons that could only mean one thing. Someone new? My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and texted Kolton. We have a problem. HR wants to see me tomorrow about conduct issues. His response came within seconds. Conference room B. Now. I found him already there, door closed, expression grim. The moment I entered, he pulled me into a tight embrace that felt more protective than romantic. Someone filed a complaint. I sat against his shoulder trying to keep my voice steady. Anonymous, according to the email. But they're investigating. I felt his body tense. Every muscle going rigid with controlled anger. Did they mention me specifically? No. But what else could it be about? He pulled back, hands gripping my shoulders, eyes intense. Listen to me. Whatever happens in that meeting, I will handle it. You won't lose your job over this. I promise you that. But his promise felt hollow when Tuesday morning arrived. The HR conference room felt like a courtroom. 3 board members sat on one side of the table, including Margaret Chen, the board chair, the head of HR, David something or other, sat at the head, and I sat alone on the other side, feeling like I was facing a firing squad. Thank you for coming, Jose, David began. His tone professionally neutral but his expression uncomfortable. We've received concerns regarding your relationship with Mr. Hayes. My stomach dropped. What kind of concerns? Multiple employees have reported observing inappropriate conduct, extended private meetings with closed doors, preferential treatment, time spent together outside normal business hours. Margaret's voice was cold, clinical. These observations, combined with an anonymous complaint filed last week, have raised serious questions about professional boundaries. Nothing inappropriate has happened, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. Mr. Hayes has been mentoring me in artistic techniques. That's all. Mentoring. David's tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. Behind closed doors. Every week. For hours at a time. You can see how that appears problematic. Before I could respond, the door opened and Kolton walked in, his presence immediately dominating the room. This meeting should not be happening without me, he said sharply, taking a seat beside me without being invited. If you have concerns about my conduct, address them to my face. Margaret's expression didn't change. Very well. Mr. Hayes, are you involved in a romantic or sexual relationship with this employee? The question hung in the air like a blade. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, waiting. Kolton could lie, could deny everything, could save his position and throw me under the bus. It would be the smart play, the safe play. Instead, he said, what Jose and I do outside of work hours is none of this company's business. Margaret's eyebrows rose. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. His voice was steel. My personal life is private. Not when it violates company policy, another board member interjected. Supervisor-employee relationships are explicitly forbidden. The power imbalance creates liability issues for the company. Then I'll resign, Kolton said simply. The room went silent. My head snapped toward him. What? No. I'm serious. He didn't look at me, keeping his eyes on the board. I'll step down from my position. Effective immediately. Jose can stay in his current role without any repercussions. Kolton, you can't. I started, but Margaret cut me off. That's one option. The other is that Jose resigns and you remain as CEO. I opened my mouth to accept to take that burden off his shoulders, but Kolton's hand found mine under the table, squeezing hard enough to stop me. Not acceptable, he said flatly. I'm making my decision. I'll have my formal resignation letter to you by end of business today. They argued, tried to convince him to reconsider, but Kolton was immovable and eventually they had no choice but to accept. The meeting ended with cold handshakes and tense silence. Outside in the hallway, I grabbed his arm. You can't do this. That company is your life. Everything you've built was just a company, he interrupted, turning to face me fully. Important, yes. But it's not my life. You are. My throat tightened. You're going to regret this. Resent me for it. Never. He cupped my face in both hands, thumb brushing my cheek. I've built one successful company. I can build another. But you? You're irreplaceable. And I'm not losing you for a job title. What are we going to do? He smiled then, small but genuine. We're going to figure it out, together. Maybe I'll start that consulting firm I've been considering. Maybe you'll finally open that art studio you sketch in your notebooks when you think I'm not looking. Whatever happens next, we face it as partners, equal partners. Standing in that hallway with his hands on my face and his eyes full of certainty, I realized something. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most unexpected rewards. Because real love isn't about the easy choice or the safe path. It's about choosing someone even when the whole world says you shouldn't. And as Kolton kissed me right there in the hallway, no longer caring who saw, I knew I'd make the same choice again. Every single time.